This is clearly a false flag operation. Ukraine is so dependent on the West for weapons to continue fighting the war, and much like Putin's nuclear saber rattling, this is an attempt to make the West think twice about arming Ukraine.
Russia is persisting with its claims that Ukraine is planning to use a dirty bomb.
If Russia calls and says Ukraine is allegedly preparing something, it means one thing. Russia has already prepared a nuclear strike.
Russia would be making an incredibly serious mistake if we're to use a tactical nuclear weapon.
Russia often accuses others for what they intend to do themselves. We have seen this pattern before, from Syria to Ukraine.
Dirty bombs, as they're called, are bombs made by wrapping radioactive material in conventional explosives. When detonated, they disperse the radioactive material in a localized area surrounding the explosion. And as you've already heard from Mr. Stoltenberg, false flag operations are a tactic that Russia has already used a number of times since invading Ukraine.
There's actually a great example unfolding right now of another false flag operation that the Kremlin is engaged in, and it involves the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. There have been indications that Russia has laid mines there. If you blow this thing up, it ends up creating a huge flood, will knock out civilian infrastructure, displace a lot of people. It causes a great deal of chaos. But Russia is claiming that Ukraine is going to blow up the hydroelectric plant. Now, that's obviously absurd. But again, we see this pattern where Russia accuses others of the very acts that it is intending to carry out.
Well, in the meantime, Vladimir Putin has this week been monitoring drills of Russian nuclear forces in action, something they've done every October since 2013. The Russian president was briefed via video link by top military officials in Moscow, including Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, who told Mr. Putin that the drills were intended to simulate a massive nuclear strike, a retaliatory measure should Russia be targeted. Exercises involved those on land, air and sea and included multiple practice launches of ballistic and cruise missiles, such as this one, which the Kremlin says came from a Tula submarine in the northern Barents Sea. Speaking to Fox News, nuclear expert Matthew Kronig says, tactically it makes little sense for Ukraine to use a dirty bomb. But for Russia, there's a different calculus in play.
The idea is that there's been an explosion, first responders show up, if they have Geiger counters, they're showing that there's radioactivity in the area. People might mistakenly assume it was a real nuclear attack, they might overreact.
So, should the worst happen, Gillian, what should the response be from the international community?
I think the response to any significant aggression, like a nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb, it would have to be very forceful. But there's a range of options within it. There are open questions about whether this would be a strike on Russian troops already within Ukraine, whether it would be a nuclear strike in retaliation, a tactical nuclear strike, not a strategic nuclear strike, or whether it would be some other kind of kinetic force used. And then there's a question about whether this would take place on Russian soil. So there's a range of options. I don't think that the United States and other Western leaders should spell out explicitly how they would respond, but they should make it very clear to the Kremlin that if it does choose to escalate in this way, that the consequences will be swift and severe.
Any use of a nuclear weapon in Ukraine will fundamentally change the nature of the conflict. President Putin, Russia, knows that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought, and they also know that there will be severe consequences.
The fact that Mr. Putin is resorting to threats and false flag operations just highlights again the difficult situation he finds himself in. This was a battle Mr. Putin thought would be swift, and now he's running out of options.
I think we're gearing up for a difficult couple of months, particularly as Russia hits civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure. They are trying to terrorize and freeze the Ukrainian population into submission, and I think we need to be paying attention to how we can support Ukrainian civilians in this fight, in addition to supporting the military.